Welcome to the Industry Experts Panel at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com. My name is Michelle Holliday. Today is going to be an incredibly interesting show because today our guest is Mr. William Edward Binney. Bill is a former intelligence official with the NSA, the National Security Agency of the United States. By profession, he is an expert mathematician, and to this day, he remains the best hacker that the NSA has ever known. Bill was with the NSA for over 35 years. Not only was he the NSA's best hacker, he was also the creator of the intelligence programs that the NSA still uses to this day. Bill retired less than 2 months following 9/11, and he became one of the first top-level whistleblowers of the United States government. This is Bill's second appearance on our show, and during the first one, he mentioned some explosive facts that we are about to go into today. It's important to note that there are very few people in the world who can tell us the truth behind the accusation that Russia hacked into the DNC in 2016. Bill Binney is the top expert in understanding that truth. So we are going to go there. Bill, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you. And thanks for having me.
Oh, we are all deeply honored and truly privileged to have you here. Now, Bill, before we head into our questions today, just to set the stage for everybody, please share your own personal background and the timeline of when you started with the NSA and what your role ultimately was with that agency.
I started actually in the military. I started with the United States Army in 1965 to 69. I was in the Army, and they send you through a battery of tests, and then they say this is where you have the aptitude. So they sent me to the Army Security Agency, which is it's really, you see, it's part of NSA, and it's really NSA CSS. That's the Combined Security Services. That's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, and some Coast Guard components of signals intelligence, which is the business of NSA. So all of that falls under NSA. And that's why the NSA director is a military guy, because he's got these military formations underneath him. So they have to have a military guy there. So I was there from 65 to 69. And then at the end of 69, I was getting out of service, and the NSA really wanted to hire me. And I thought, well, gee, I was having so much fun in the military, I thought I'd continue it. So in early 1970, I started back with NSA as a civilian. And I stayed there until they started spying on everybody in the United States in October of 2001. And at the end of October, I got out of that place because I couldn't be associated with that unconstitutional activity. So I was there for a little over 32 years, and the combined services a little over 36 years in signals intelligence. And after that, at that point toward the end, I was what I like to call the technical director of the world. Because actually, I was the technical director of a group of about 6,000 analysts who were involved basically in reporting anything in the countries from communications between people in the world, all countries in the world. So I like my title, technical director of the world. I thought that was a cute title. At any rate, I was trying to have a little fun there. You can't take everything so seriously that you can't have fun on that. So at any rate, after I left there, I also went into consulting, and I tried to get some work with NRO because the Senate staffer for the Senate Intelligence Committee asked me and our little group at ND Mappy LLC, there were 3 of us in this consulting group, asked us to go over there and help NRO with this program, RUMK. And so we did that. We went over there then, but when NSA found us that we were working there, they called the managers at NRO and told them to get rid of us. So we were fired from that job, basically. And they also fired everybody involved in the whole program. They canceled the whole program.
Now Bill, let me, what is NRO?
That's the National Reconnaissance Office. They handle all the satellites and reconnaissance for the United States.
Oh, so all of the satellites, you were working with that program. Okay, I see.
Yeah. So they got that whole thing canceled, and the staffer in the House, the Senate Intelligence Committee, tried to get the members of the Senate Intelligence Committee to investigate this, because it was they actually canceled a meaningful program just because we were there. And so the Senate, of course, the members refused to do that because they didn't want to bump heads with NSA, because, again, Mueller in the Senate said, if you remember on Rachel Maddow's show or something like that, on CNN, he had said about Trump messing with the intelligence community. He said he shouldn't do that because they have 6 ways to Sunday of getting back at you. Well, that's why, the Senate didn't want to mess around with NSA. So, but at any rate, then we went from there. We tried to go into INSCOM, and the NSA called down there and got us fired from that one, or never got started. That was when General Alexander was there. So, and then we went from there to another 3-letter agency, and we started doing some work there and finding so many things that we were embarrassing the fort. So the director of the technology group there terminated our contract. So based on that, and then we went to Customs and Border Protection, and we started doing a bunch of things there. They got us noticed there too, and that's when they decided they were going to investigate us with the FBI. So they had the FBI down there, so they got us fired from that job too. So, everywhere we went, they got us fired. And then they terminated our access. So they finally decided they have to just get rid of us. So, but we were doing things that, doing things that we left them in the 1990s when we left NSA, doing that kind of work for other agencies, trying to bring that technology back into the U.S. government so they could become, productive and so on. And what happened, quite simply, was they didn't want that competition, because we knew at the time in 2001, when we were leaving, or just about to leave, that businesses in the country were lobbying the intelligence committees to terminate our program inside NSA. Now, think about that for a minute. Contractors coming in trying to terminate a government program run by government people. This is kind of suspicious. It's really corrupt. What it was they wanted to feed on the billions of dollars that were going to be swindled out of the U.S. public as a result. Because we did our thin thread program that solved the volume, velocity, variety problem, which was the problem with the digital world, the explosion of communications. We'd already solved that internally in NSA, and they Hayden and company rejected it. And threw it out because they were asking for $3.8 billion for the first 5 years of a program to develop that with the industry. Well, the point is, it only cost us $3.2 million to do the entire program that we did for Thin Thread from beginning to end. So they were asking 1,000 times the amount of money it took to do the program we had already running, by the way, in 3 separate sites, 24 hours a day for almost a year. And they threw it out and started all over again and failed miserably. And it only took them, I think, 4 years to do it, 4 years to fail miserably. But in the process, they were wasting billions of dollars, swindling people, and they had to keep the technology we had out of the government, because if they came into government, it would make them look really bad. And that's what the problem was. And also the problem was that also it would cut off, it would recognize for the government that they had the problem solved, so they couldn't ask for more money, which is what they did. So they, in fact, doubled the request for more money after 9/11, So it was just a swindle of the U.S. public. But when they had to spy on the U.S. citizens and everybody else in the world that is switching from looking at groups of people to looking at every individual on the planet, which is what they did, including all U.S. citizens. First starting internally in the U.S. because they were closest, right? We were the closest ones to them. They had access to all that fiber optic lines and everything through AT&T and Verizon and a couple of other companies. So, that was the first target, and that was the first way they did that. So, it was just crazy from there on. But in order to do that, they didn't have any software around that would manage that kind of volume of data except for ours. So they took our software, removed the filtering up front that filtered out everybody that wasn't relevant, so you only got the relevant data. And then after that, they removed the part that protected the identities of people. If you took them in and you didn't know they were involved, we encrypted their attributes. They removed that. And then we had an auditing routine that said if you came into our network looking at any data on our system, we would watch you, and monitor you and see what you did, where you went, how long you stayed, and all of that, all the information. They removed that because they didn't want anybody to know what they were doing. So that meant they removed the filters that all the data then of everybody came into the system. They removed the protections of identity so they knew who everybody was. And they removed the auditing routine so that people couldn't tell what they did with that data. And that's the way it is today.
Right. I want to point out to everyone, and I think that everyone's recognizing this, Bill is highly technical in his thoughts. He's extremely connected with every agency that our government has. He knows every person that was involved in everything from the time he was there through to today. Mm-hmm. So what we're talking, when he says they, he knows exactly who he's speaking of. So, and exactly the programs that they're using today, he is intimately aware. The reason I'm making this point, number one, we're going to come back to all of that depending on how much time we have. You are fascinating. We're going to have you back for a third show, as a series of Bill Binney shows, exposés with Bill Binney. But what I want to do, now that we've laid the groundwork for who you are and the extent of your knowledge, I want to go specifically into the allegation of the Russian hack into the DNC in 2016. This accusation and the allegation that the president was somehow involved in this, and this indeed took place. So something that you had mentioned in our first interview that everybody can go back to that was absolutely fascinating is a fact that I want to just start off with a yes or no question. Okay. Is there, Bill, any way possible that Russia hacked into the DNC computers and thereby obtained the information that was leaked?
Well, first of all, I'd say the DNC security was really pretty bad. Okay, so I'm quite sure that any number of countries looked into that DNC data. It's just the question really is, who gave it to WikiLeaks to publish?
Yes.
Right? Well, we clearly know and can prove through forensics that the data that WikiLeaks had from the DNC, that is the data that was taken down on the 23rd and also the 25th of May of 2016 and also the 26th of August of 2016. All of that was DNC data, and all of it had the properties that are basically a function of a program that reads data to a thumb drive or a CD-ROM or something of that nature. Meaning it reads it to storage. This is the FAT file format, file allocation table format. It's a little program that reads data to a storage device, but at the same time, it has a 2-second window on write routines. That means it rounds off the last modified time of every file it reads onto storage to the nearest even number on the second. And that's all that goes. It goes right down to the even second. So there were 35,813 emails from the DNC that were posted by WikiLeaks. All of them had this even numbered last modified time format, which is property of the FAT table allocation, file allocation table program reading data to a storage device, which says very simply, the data was read to a storage device, physically transported before WikiLeaks posted it. Okay, so that means somebody carried it there. That means some kind of inside job, or downloading locally to a thumb drive, for example, and giving it to somebody to carry to WikiLeaks.
Okay, so when we're specifically speaking about the Russian hack of specifically the information that was leaked, which was the then collusion investigation by Mueller and whatnot over 2 years, spending about $36 million, and basically on a daily basis of our media, accusing our own media, accusing our own president of collusion with a Russian hack job that did not happen. No way. You're saying
Nope.
no, absolutely not.
No, absolutely not. No, there's another set of data, which is the Lucifer 2 data. That's a separate set of data. That's more interesting, and that tries to get, that has evidence that gets back to the really pointing to the people who originated this charade, this entire false accusation, and the entire set of data, which was all a basis for, first of all, Mueller's report, and then Rosenstein's indictment of some GRU agents, all of which is fundamentally based on lies, and we can prove that. So let's go through that if we could.
Yes, please.
For Two's data, he basically posted two sets of data.
Bill, before you start, who is Goose for Two?
Well, that's what I'm going to get to at the end after we go through all the evidence.
Okay, so we're speaking of Goose for Two being an individual. Okay. All right.
Well, or multiple people, yeah.
An entity.
Inside a U.S. agency, yes. So, but here's what the evidence we came up with. We had first of all, it's not just me. There are like half a dozen or so people in the VIPs, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, who were involved with this in the United States. And there's some also overseas associates and some other associates inside the U.S. who helped us look at this data. So collectively, this is the result. It's not just me. So, when we looked at the two sets of data that Goose for Two put out on the web to look at and saying, here's the stuff I hacked from the 5th of July of 2016 and also from the 1st of September of 2016. So we started looking at that data to see what we could see forensically, and we found that the data came down like this. It would be a data name, a number of characters in the file, and a timestamp. Then the next file, data name, number of characters, timestamp. So it was file after file, timestamp after timestamp. So all you had to do was difference the timestamp between the two surrounding one email, the time before the time at the end of it, and you had the time it took to send the amount of characters there. So it could tell you how fast the data was passed. And so we calculate the speed of download basically of every file. And that ranged between 19 and 49.1 megabytes per second. Now that's 49.1 million characters per second. A byte is a character. So that's too fast to go across the international web. And we had basically said that from the knowledge that some of our technical people had of communications links and so on. And some people that were associated with this thought that it still could do that. So we said, okay, we're going to try it. So we tested it. We got somebody to put out a gigabyte of data over here. And I got some hacker friends of mine in Europe to test it and try to pull it across from Albania and Serbia and Belgrade, and then a couple places in the Netherlands, and also between data centers in New Jersey and London. And the fastest transfer rate we could get was between two data centers, one in New Jersey and one in London, and that was 12 megabytes per second, slightly less than 1/4 the speed necessary to transfer just the data, not accounting for housekeeping or anything that would also be added. So, but that's the best we could do. It was 1/4 the capacity of the high speed that we had transferred here. However, all those speeds are compatible with a download to a thumb drive. All those are possible with that. Plus, when you looked at the two files, 5 July and 1 September, and you get down to looking at the millisecond on the transfer rates, they were down to millisecond. And you looked at the holes in the data set for 5 July, you could fill them with the data from 1 September if you ignore the date and the time, and the hour, the day and the hour. If you look just at minutes, seconds, and milliseconds, those two files merge like you're shuffling a deck of cards. So in other words, Goose for Two was playing with the data. He did one download and he split it into two, and then said, I hacked it twice. You see, once I hacked it in 5 July, you knew I did it, but you couldn't stop me because I did it again on 1 September. It's crazy stuff like that. But at any rate, the point is, he was playing with the data. So he's playing with the data and he's playing with us. This is a fabrication. very clearly. And then another kicker came along just more recently. Some of our guys found 5 emails in the 15 June material that Gooser 2 put on the web and alleged that he had done a hack again. Those were the ones that had the Russian signatures. You remember all that talk about Russian signatures and emails and so on, and the hacking that said, the Russians did it, right? Well, we looked over at WikiLeaks and found the same 5 items in the posted Podesta emails by WikiLeaks. And they did not have the signatures of Russians in them. So that meant to us very simply, I mean, WikiLeaks just publishes what they get, okay? They don't change anything. That's their history for the last 12 years or something like that. So that told us that Gooser 2 inserted those signatures. Now, from the Vault 7 material, we also see that we noted that the Marble Framework program that was in the CIA data in Vault 7, they said that that was used once in 2016. Well, if you look at what does Marble Framework do? It allows you to attack a site and make it look like somebody else did it. And who are the people they could emulate or make it look like did it? Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and the Arabic nations. So, and they said it was used once in 2016. Well, it was probably used just before, earlier than the day before the 15th of June of 2016 by Gooser 2, so that he can make these hacks look like they came from Russia. And it points back to a group that we now know was in CIA targeting the Trump campaign, and it going back as for years, even before he announced.
Let's repeat that right now, because that's an important point. I'm going through this with everyone because our country needs to know the truth of what happened.
Yeah, right.
And obviously, all hacking, all encoding is based in math. We all know this. It's above most of our heads. However, you are the man, and we are so glad to have you here. Now, say that one more time. Gooser 2 is the entity that did the hacking, whether it was the Russian hacking or whatever it was. It went back to where? Say that to us one more time and reiterate.
Yeah, it basically, all the evidence is pointing back to CIA, an internal CIA group that was put together according to this whistleblower we have on the Hammer program. This group was put together by Clapper and Brennan to spy on the campaign for Trump, and it was done by this contractor he was, and it looked at all the communications with the members of the Trump campaign, the lawyers, and everything, and he actually dated the spying on Trump and his lawyers back to 2003. So they had been watching him for a very long time, well before he even announced on the campaign.
2003?
Yes. Yeah, that's what he said. Now, he's got references as documentation of that, and he said he reported it, and it's in the files of the FBI and the DOJ. But they were covering it up, okay, because they were a part of it. Right? The Department of Justice, Brennan and all of them knew about this stuff. They there was no way they could not know about it. I mean, after all, this fabrication came, they knew the Steele dossier was a fabrication also. So all of this stuff it's really a corrupt charade fabricated by the DOJ, the FBI, NSA, CIA, and the Democratic National Committee.
This is
because they all paid for the dossier. They're all involved in this. And I would also include DHS and also State Department. So it's a leftover Obama appointees into those departments, I think, that are involved in all of this. We're going to find out, of course, what the ultimate, how many were really involved based on the Durham investigation and the Barr. And the Barr, hopefully, he'll start issuing referrals for indictments out of it. So, if he doesn't, then we'll know that we still have a department of just us, and we are not part of it.
Right. To this day, half of our country still believes that our president colluded with Russia to hack the DNC. And they believe it because of the daily media that happened for 2 years while this investigation was going on, in which so many people's lives were ripped apart. And when it goes back to the truth of what you're speaking of, it's so important for everyone to know.
And let me put it this way, it's not just the media, because I put sworn affidavits in the Roger Stone case telling all this story to them in that sworn affidavit. I also put it into the General Flynn's case. And the judges in both cases wouldn't let me testify. So I couldn't testify in those cases. And that's a sworn affidavit. I'm liable for perjury there. But I had all the evidence. I was ready to present all of that in court. And they would not allow it because it would take away the entire narrative that they were pushing for 2.5 years, you know? It would destroy the mainstream media as fabricators, as a part of this fabrication, as a part of this, and they knowingly did this. So, you know, they couldn't allow that in the federal court. Although I still have my sworn affidavits submitted in those court records. That's a part of the record that's in there. But I'm also suing the government in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. So, because they are still violating the constitutional rights of every U.S. citizen. They're still collecting all the data on everybody. And until they stop that, until they purge their databases, you can't have the DOD or the FBI or any of them going into the NSA database with no oversight, by the way. And there's no oversight of that. The only ones who have oversight are the NSA analysts. The rest of them don't. You haven't heard anything about oversight of the FBI using NSA data or any of the rest of it. That came out in a Supreme Court case, Amnesty International versus Clapper. And in there, they were claiming that if anybody in a criminal case, any defendant in a criminal case, if the NSA data was used against them in that case, they would be told, the judges would be told, the lawyers would be told, so that everybody knew this, because it allows the challenge, you're allowed to challenge due process in the Sixth Amendment, says you're allowed to challenge the data used against you to arrest you. And when you use NSA data, they can't put that in a court because they didn't get a warrant to do it. So what happens is they do a parallel construction. They use standard techniques to go around and investigate people, and it helps that you know where the data is to begin with, you know? So you can go directly and get it, and then use that in the court of law. Well, that's fundamentally perjury. It's also fabricating evidence against an individual, so it's framing them in a court of law, basically. So it's perjury, framing, and they don't tell the judge or anybody. Nobody knows in the court, and they have very specific instructions, which I have, by the way, on their own regulations for doing the parallel construction. They list all of the things you cannot do. You can't write it down. You can't tell the court, the judges, or anybody. And this is DOJ policy. I mean, this is like fundamentally destroying the entire integrity of our judicial system. And this is what has happened as a result of this deep state, if you will, shadow government. I call them the Praetorian Guard because they're determined to control what happens and who's involved in making that happen. So it's just we've lost our republic here, and most people don't know it yet, and they're still blindly going along believing these people.
Right. That's why people like yourself are so crucial for our country, for the people of our country, to understand what's actually happening behind the scenes outside of what they're being told. Now, staying for a moment with the topic of the accusation of the Russian hack and turning now to President Trump. I understand that at the president's request, you met with our current Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, when he was the director of the CIA. And I'd like you to go into it for us. How did that happen? When did that happen? And what can you tell us about the topic and the subjects and what was said in that meeting?
Well, I was in Europe at the time trying to get a company started over there in Amsterdam. And my wife got a call from the from CIA, the Director Pompeo's office, and saying that he'd like to talk to me. So she relayed that message to me in Amsterdam, and I told him, I said I couldn't get there right away because I had a flight to come back about a couple of weeks after that. And so I said, when I get back, I could do that. So we arranged for a meeting. I think it was the 24th of November of 2017 when he was director there. And so when I got back, I then went down there to see him and meet him on the 7th floor of which is the top floor. The directors are always on the top floor, whatever building they're in, so it has to do with status. I don't, So,
the top floor of the CIA building, right? Of the
CIA building down in Langley, Virginia. Yeah. So I was in there, and the first thing he said to me when I walked in, he said, the president said if I wanted to know any factual evidence about Russiagate that I should talk to you. And I said, okay, fine, I'll tell you everything I can, which I did. And I started off, with the booster 2 download speeds, which were too fast to go across the web, and we proved that and calculated and all these calculations for every file, how fast it went across and so on, because as your downloading speeds will vary a little bit over time. So we had all that data. They asked me how we did the calculations. I told them how we did the calculation. There were 2 other people in the room with me, and Director Pompeo at the time. And I assumed that they were from the analysis section. Probably one of them was from that group that was doing the spying. And, these are the forensics people. So in the ones who run the attacks on, like the Vault 7 attacks, and they were asking me how I figured that. And I said, this is not really technically that difficult, it's just really pretty straightforward stuff, So I told them everything I could about that. And I also told them that Director Pompeo, I said, the intelligence community agencies are lying to you and the president. And this is obvious because why are you asking me this question about forensics, about this data, when your people have the data too and have the availability to go check out everything anyway? And they should have done that anyhow. I mean, after all, we pay over $100 billion a year for the intelligence community to run these operations. And here I am with a few other people, and we spend maybe a couple $100 a piece doing this exercise, figuring out what's going on. And instead, over here, we're spending over $100 billion a year, and they can't come up with the same answers? They're lying. Plus, I know that NSA has all these fiber optic taps on all the points that exit the U.S. and all the ones that enter the U.S. and all the sides, all the major points inside the U.S. and all the major cities across the country. They have all these fiber optic taps, and I know basically what buildings they're in because I found that we're using Google. I found all of that. A very simple thing. If you think about it, all these buildings that have all of this internal communications capability and processing, that's a lot of heat. That generates a lot of heat with all these computers and so on. So you need very large cooling units on the top of the building, on the roof, to keep the building cool, right? So when you're looking at AT&T buildings inside the United States and all the cities, you have to look for large cooling units on the roof. Plus, there's another aspect you have to look at. The shortest distance between major cities is run along the rail lines, because the rail lines were set up a long time ago and they took the shortest distance. And so, these big cables with all these fibers, that gets pretty expensive stuff. So the shorter the line, the cheaper the line, right? So you run along the rail lines. And plus, the other factor is you don't disturb anybody. You don't have to tear up sidewalks and roads and stuff. The right-of-way is already there. You just lay it along the line. And so it's much easier and convenient, less expensive to do it that way. So that gets the major joints to the cities, and then from there on you spread out, okay? But so you look for buildings with large cooling units on the roof that are fairly close to rail lines, so that they can easily run the line like maybe 1 or 2 blocks off the rail line to this building where it would be distributed from there in the cities and locally. So that was the criteria, and I just went on Google and looked at Google Earth, and I could see the buildings, and there they were, and I looked at the cooling units and rail lines. and that gave me all of them. So I've got all of those, including the ones overseas too. So I also matched it up with data centers for AT&T and Verizon and so on. So
it's amazing when you know what you're doing, how simple something is, but then people make it sound so complicated. We need billions for this.
Yeah, I know. That's the charade. That's the swindle. They said first swindle was they said you had to give up privacy for security. That was a lie from the beginning, and they knew that. We already solved that problem. We can pull out all relevant data without pulling in innocent, irrelevant people. And that would be around the world. We don't need that around the world. Because what's happening is when they take in so much data, nobody can see the threat coming, and so you have all these terrorist attacks in the United States and around the world that have happened because people didn't focus. They didn't have a disciplined, professional, focused job. They were taking in everything. And I did an estimate once of the numbers of people in the Five Eyes group, the English-speaking countries, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the US, and also the affiliated countries, which I think there are about 9 now, at least that I know of. And I said, how many analysts would they have available to look at this data? And I said, well, it's about 20,000. My estimate was about 20,000 analysts to be able to look at this data from all the countries involved. And assuming they could uniquely divide it, which they can't, they can't do that. And they don't want to because everybody wants to do the high priority things, so they can get credit or something, So that's the game they play. But if you assume that they could uniquely divide out that any one person in the world was looked at, one and only one analyst of these 20,000s, well, they're looking at over 4 billion people. Well, divide it out, 20,000 into 4 billion, and you get 200,000 people. I mean, every analyst, if you uniquely was looking at a unique person, all the people, you have to look at 200,000 people. That's a fairly large city, Now, is that possible to do? No. And why? That's why they're all failing all over the world. These attacks happen, and they don't know. And then afterward, they come along and say, oh, yeah, we knew these guys were bad guys, Well, if you knew they were bad guys, why didn't you focus on them? Why are you looking at the rest of the world, irrelevant parts of the world, totally irrelevant people? And you're swamping yourself with data. That's basically what they're saying internally. Even in the Snowden material, there were articles written by analysts inside NSA and MI5 and DCHQ and so on, saying we're overburdened by overload. We've got too much data. We can't see threats coming. They're saying it to their own managers. And what are the managers doing? They're ignoring it. Why are they ignoring it? Because there's more money to ignore it. If you ignore it, it costs 1,000 times as much to do this bulk acquisition as it did to do the focused, targeted approach. And that's why they're doing it.
Let me nutshell this. So what you're saying is, instead of pulling out who seems to be a threat and focusing on them, which would in fact stop events, they're looking at everyone. That's so that right. they can pull in a bunch of money. They're spending a lot of money, looking at everyone, and therefore they miss the threats simply because they're overwhelmed with data, and they're doing it just because they can spend more money doing it.
Well, that was my point from the beginning. I've been saying that since 2001 with Hayden and company and the rest of them, Bush, Hayden, Tennant, and what's his name? Vice President Cheney. They were the 4 who started this. And they decided basically...
Now, what did they start? One more time. What were their names and what did they start?
Bush, Cheney, Hayden, and Tennant. Tennant was the director of CIA at the time. They started this bulk acquisition of data on everybody. Cheney wanted to know what his political enemies were doing. And the others just wanted the money and empire building. And what they were doing effectively, and this is what I've been saying, they basically made a choice. They decided to trade the security of the people of the United States for money. And then when Obama came along, he doubled down on it. And then he built this big data center out there in Utah for them. And now they started another one over here a couple of years ago. And I don't know how far along it is. I haven't checked it lately, but it's 2.8 million square foot facility, which is just about 3 times the size of Utah. I mean, they took out a 36-hole golf course over here in Fort Meade to do it. I mean, you could go on Google Earth and see how they wiped out a whole golf course. It was the Eisenhower golf course. I'm sure he's rolling over in his grave because they took his golf course away. It was originally put in Fort Meade for him to come out in the 50s to play golf. So at any rate, but that was only the first swindle. The second swindle was cybersecurity. Now, think about this for a minute. The Vault 7 material was hundreds of millions of lines of source code. Now, that means tens of thousands of attacks on servers, firewalls, operating systems, switches, networks, all kinds of anything on the net that they needed an attack to break into to see what people were doing or saying or what they were planning. Those are the attacks that they knew about of weaknesses in all of the existing systems that we all use. So that meant we were all vulnerable here, and they knew it, and they knew specifically how we were vulnerable. And yet they did nothing about it. Why? Because that meant the window would stay open for them to be able to read what we were saying and doing. And so that meant we were all sitting here fat, dumb, and happy and vulnerable. So then when we get attacked, what do they say? Well, we need more money for cybersecurity. That's another swindle. So why don't you fix the problems, the tens of thousands of problems you know about, so that maybe we'll have some cybersecurity. Then if you get attacked, yeah, we should give you more money. But until then, no, you shouldn't get any more, period. Fix the problems you know, and don't I call it short-sighted finite thinking. Because what happens, the OPM, Office of Personnel Management for the United States government, where they have all of the collection of SF-86, a file that tells your entire life history and your family, where you worked, who you worked for, all of this, and it's all in your SF-86s. Well, they held all of the SF-86s for over 20 million people who had security clearances of all levels, secret, top secret, and more. And so what that meant was, and the Chinese did this hack, of course, not the Russians. And so the point is they now have all the information to reconstruct our entire intelligence community, including all those people in the embassies around the world and what agencies they work for. They have all of that data. And, and it's because they didn't fix the stuff they already knew about.
Right. Well, I have a question. When you were meeting with then CIA Director Mike Pompeo, of course, the current Secretary of State, did you mention that the entity, Goose for Two, that
Yes.
actually got the information for what was accused as being a Russian hack was indeed coming from the CIA? Did you say that while he was director of CIA? What did you say?
I didn't have the evidence to show that as CIA, but when we could prove that the data that he put out there in the 15th of June didn't really have the signatures in WikiLeaks publication, that told me that was an indication that a Marvel framework was used, which points right back to CIA. Plus, we didn't have the whistleblower from the Hammer program telling us that there was a group that Clapper and Brennan put together inside CIA to specifically spy on the Trump campaign and others, by the way, judges and so on. They were looking at important people they viewed to be important to be able to manipulate or control or blackmail. So the point is that once that came together with the Marvel framework use, then this was more recent, by the way, like in the last couple of months.
Oh,
so
okay.
I didn't know that at the time, but I did know about the download speeds, and it couldn't have been a hack. That's my point. It had to be downloaded locally. So that's what I told him at the time.
Okay.
So, but now we have more information looking back at it. I mean, and the intelligence community should have known this all along. I mean, but he said, Director Pompeo said he felt that he had a lot of hardworking, dedicated people at CIA, and he had a hard time thinking of them not telling him the truth. I said, well, you don't have to believe me. All you have to do is go look at the Department of Defense Inspector General's report, 05-Intel-03. That one clearly shows all the corruption, fraud, waste, abuse, and lying in the NSA. that they actually lied to the investigators from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. And they actually discovered it. They found out, and they said, yeah, well, here's where you're lying to us, And they actually, one of the head Inspector General of the Inspector General's investigative team told me once that he had a manager in front of him from NSA, where at one point he had to pull out his badge and put it on the table and saying, interfering with the Department of Defense Inspector General investigation carries with it a 5-year prison sentence and up to $5,000 of fine. He had to say that to an NSA manager to shut them up and get them to realize what the situation was.
Right.
In other words, it's not appropriate to lie to the Inspector General's office.
Exactly. The programming that proves the Goose for Two situation that just came out a couple of months ago, go through that one more time for us.
That was, first of all, the fact that our guys looking at the data back from the 15th of June, they found 5 items there, 5 emails that had the signatures, the Russian signatures in them, that for the hacking. Mm-hmm. And they went to WikiLeaks and found that those items in the WikiLeaks posting did not have those signatures. Which says that Goose for Two inserted them. And that then maps back to the Marble Framework Program, the description there, plus the statement in the Vault 7 release that said it was used once in 2016, which is the time frame 15 June 2016 of this data. So it would all fit together as the pointing back to CIA as basically creators of the Goose for Two persona.
I see. Okay. Now, Bill, what are your thoughts about President Trump? I know that through your career, you've been through several presidents, and you've basically lived at the top of the intelligence agencies. How would you compare President Trump with other presidents and their administrations?
First of all, I think he's the one that's starting to realize what the situation of the government is in Washington. The rest of them didn't. They simply, for example, would accept anything that the intelligence community would tell them. And now President Trump is looking at it as a little bit, dubious of what they're saying. I mean, he needs to be challenging them to come forth with the factual evidence of the basis for what they're saying. I mean, there's no verification or validation process by the FISA court or the intelligence committees, all of them. They were just drifting along being basically advocates for whatever the intelligence community wanted to do. That's why they could take this bulk. Let me make another point here about Pelosi when she was there talking about, we have to stand up for the Constitution. There's a little dark secret here, okay? And it goes like this. When Bush, Cheney, Hayden, and Tenet were starting this program of spying on the U.S., unconstitutionally spying on every U.S. citizen in the country, the first people they tried to co-opt in, and did effectively co-opt in, from Congress were the 4 members, the chair and the ranking members of the House and Senate Intelligence and Committees. And those 4 were briefed, I think it was the 4th of November of 2001, on all of the spying programs on U.S. citizens. And they agreed to it. And the names of those people for the House were Porter Goss and Nancy Pelosi. So she already agreed in 2001 to violate the Constitution. That's a violation of her oath of office. They all did. It was their whole oath of office is to protect and defend the Constitution. And the president has the one additional duty of preserving, protecting, and defending. So they're all violating their constitutional oath. Now, it's just hypocritical for her to be out there saying that now about this ridiculous, baseless impeachment.
Right. I want to cover that. What are your thoughts on that? It's pretty obvious to try to impeach a president during the year of an election, that they simply are afraid he'll be elected again. But many Americans genuinely have watched this and the talk of impeachment days before he was ever even sworn into office. Many of these people are on tape talking about impeaching him before he ever stepped on. And they see it as an attack on the American people's right to choose their own president. And I want you to talk about that perspective.
Well, my view is, my personal view is that it's a form of sedition and treason against this country and the fundamental principles of our republic. Because they're manufacturing, they have no fundamental basis of any crime or anything else to be doing an impeachment. There's no evidence whatsoever there. There's only hearsay by people who don't like Trump, or people in the State Department, for example, who don't like his foreign policy. Well, let me put it this way. The duty of the people working in the State Department is to carry out the policy set by the President of the United States. In other words, who sets policy, foreign policy? It's the President. That's in the Constitution. So their duty is to follow and to implement the policy of the President, not to contradict it and say, I don't like it, so therefore I'm going to manufacture some kind of statement that'll get him into trouble or try to cause him problems. That's basically sedition. You're subverting the entire process and the established process of the government. So, that's the way I view it anyway. And there's so far the Democrats have come up with zero evidence of anything. The only person who did was the ambassador, who said, when he was talking to the president, he said, what do you want from them, the Ukrainians? And he said, I don't want any quid pro quo or anything. I just don't want anything for it. So, and in fact, all this weapons and stuff that they were going to give to the Ukrainians and the money they were going to give to them so they get by, that was all happened within the time frame that they were supposed to deliver that data and so on. This is just a total manufactured set of circumstances that the Democrats are trying to get people to think. And by repetition, they keep saying it over and over again, as if we're going to believe them, especially with Schiff, right? Shifty Schiff, when he came out and talked about the Russiagate for years and saying he had evidence, from backroom stuff, classified material, that the Russians did this. And in fact, in the end, he had absolutely nothing. He was making up the story, just like he made up the conversation that the president had with President Zelensky. He made that up in the committee. He just said it. The guy is mentally deranged. He just figures that if he says it, people are going to believe it. So he keeps saying it over and over again, using, I would point out, it's using the standard sophist technique created or documented by the Greeks back in Athens, back in the BC, before Christ, right? And I don't know how many years, it must have been a couple of hundred years anyway. And they called it the school of sophism, how you win an argument. This is the ways you win an argument, whether you're putting forth a fallacy or you actually have a valid syllogism, an argument, So here, what they're doing is saying these are the sophist school techniques that we can use to get the American people to believe what we're saying, and it's just through repetition from many different angles, many different people saying the same thing. And you can see it. And they have the mainstream media, many different mainstream media saying the same thing. It's all that concept of what the ancient Greeks had of how to win an argument through false means, and it is a false fallacy to simply believe that repetition from many different sources is going to mean it's right, when in fact it's wrong.
And the scary part is it works.
Yeah, well, the mainstream media wouldn't let me on, you see, because they wouldn't call me to do anything. It just like the judges in the courts for General Flynn and also for Roger Stone, they wouldn't let me testify. So it's not just the media; it's the courts. I think it's the influence of the Democratic Party and what they're saying and what they're doing, because it's an extension of what they're saying. If you look at them, they're all saying the same thing.
Bill, why do you think this has happened? I understand that President Trump, before he took office, way back in 2003, I think you said they started really spying on him as part of a group of very influential people, nothing to do with the presidency at the time.
Well, that's right.
But why do you think that this attack has happened? Because first we have the Russia accusation, which appears to have been actually created as what they call the safety net and insurance policy. I think that's what they were speaking about, was the insurance, and it was a very intricate, detailed plan because so many people were involved. There was so much information why do you think all of these people who obviously knew, if you know, and you know all these people know, why did all these people join together to do this?
Because there's several reasons. One, the political reason is that when President Trump came into office, he didn't owe anybody anything. He had no political IOUs. He wasn't a politician, right? And he didn't need money because he got his own money, and he gets up his salary every year to different charities and things like that. So also, he's achieving quite a bit. A lot of things that they said were never going to happen, he made happen again, like bringing back manufacturing jobs, changing the economy, all of this. So he's really achieving things far and above beyond any of the politicians have ever done. And so what I viewed, and I said this back in February on the Lou Dobbs show, because they were attacking him back then, and I said the reason they're attacking him is because they're afraid he's going to achieve so much, he's going to make them look like crap. And that's exactly what he's done. He's made politicians look like crap because he's achieved so much. You know, he's turned this whole economy, the whole country around. You know, you can see it in the when he goes around to give a talk, and you can see it in those the numbers of people who try to get in to hear him. You know, it's just amazing. I think so anyway. But the point is, that's one of the motivating factors because, you know, and he doesn't owe anybody anything. He says, I don't need anything from you guys. You know, I've got everything anyway. Got all the money. I have my own companies and all of that. I don't need you, and I haven't manipulated or been dependent on you to do anything politically for me. So, you know, that's the other part of it. So he's not controllable. That's the real issue. When the swamp has somebody in charge who cannot be controlled, they are really upset, really nervous, and they have to do everything they possibly can to get control of this person. That's really what they're trying to do. And I say there are basically three words that encapsulate the swamp and as well as dictatorships and everything down through history. Those three words are power, control, and money. Those are the three things they were after. And the one they had with him, they had no control at all over him because he could do his own thing. The first thing when the Iranians shot down that unmanned drone, the warmongers wanted to strike back, and he asked them how many people would be killed, and he said they told him about 150. Now, you don't go around killing 150 people for an unmanned drone shoot down. I mean, nobody got hurt, you know. So, and he did not do that. He didn't follow, and that's what the deep state doesn't like, because now he's going against this never-ending war policy, which is really great for money generation for those who are in the deep state, right? So that's another thing. They don't like that because he's not controllable. They want him to do exactly what they want him, and all previous presidents, they all wanted them to do certain things, and they eventually got their way. So in other words, the deep state, the existing structure is there no matter who the president is, and so they just want to control the president. That's why I called them the Praetorian Guard, you know, because the Praetorian Guard want to determine who the emperor was in Rome and what he did, right? So that's what they are. They're trying to do that. So it all revolves around power, control, and money.
That's so interesting because you'd think it was some deeper reason.
No, it's fundamental.
Wow.
It's also human nature, right? That is human nature. It's unfortunate that we are that way.
Yeah, and once you have the power, the control, and then you keep these wars being generated, then all this money keeps being created for all of these corporations that are basically funding and paying the intelligence agencies to want to control the president. And it's just a vicious circle. It's fascinating because, I mean, you read about in ancient times, it was hard to stay king because everybody wanted to take you out. A little bit of poison here and there, right? I mean,
if you're controllable by the people who are really in power, the ones that are established, never changing people involved in government, then if you're in tune with them and they like you, you're in. Otherwise, they could try to get you out, and that's what's happening here.
Yeah, it sure is. They don't want him to be reelected. Now, Bill, is there anything else that you'd like to add on a personal note to all of us? With everything you've seen throughout your career, what is the most important thing that you think that we should all know that we might not know?
Well, I would say, simply put, that if you just sit here and let the government take care of you, that's exactly what you're going to get. Because if democracy is not a spectator sport. I keep saying this, it's not a spectator. You have to participate. Otherwise, you're in jeopardy of losing your democracy or your republic, which we can clearly see. I mean, look at what's been going on. You can clearly see that the members of the deep state in the government, the swamp, as the president would call it, think they run the entire country and they can lie or do whatever they want. They're above the law. They keep accusing the president of being above the law, but they're the ones who are above the law. Because look at what Hillary Clinton did with the classified material. Look at what they did with the swindling money out of different countries around the world. Look at what they've done with the fabricating evidence to try a soft coup on the president. I mean, all of this is making it, because they're doing this because they think they're above the law. Clapper lied to the Congress and got away with it. Nobody did anything. Same was true with Alexander and the rest of them. They all basically falsified evidence in public, in front of the Congress. So, the point is, they think they can't influence that, or they have no power over any of this. And what they don't realize is that's absolutely wrong. They have all the power in the world. All they have to do is stand up and take it, and take the power back. You can't just sit there and let these things happen. You have to get up and actively do something. Like, for example, you should send a message to the Democrats for what they've been doing and fire as many of them as you can in the next election. That would send the message to say, straighten up or get out, Right. So I just say that people tend to think they don't have power, but they really do. They just have to stand up and take it.
Right. I want to close by saying, you made a comment to me following our last interview, and this wasn't on the air, so I want to let everyone know how you feel. When you say, and we point out, that most of the spying programs, all of the programs that are being used by the NSA today, were actually developed by you, and you had a sense of guilt that they were now used against not only Americans, but the world. And on behalf of everyone, I just want to say, we understand that you were doing it to protect us, to anticipate what other people were doing bad around the world, and they were just taken and used against us, and that we so appreciate you coming forward and telling us and making sure we all know what the truth is.
Well, thank you, but I feel it's my responsibility. After all, I created the monster they're using, or I helped to do it. I helped to create it. So who else is in a position to be able to speak against it? I have to do it.
Right. Well, it's just always fascinating to have you on this show, and we're looking forward to a lot more of these. Please tell everyone how they can follow your work, Bill.
Well, I guess it's Googling. Google's the best way, because you can get most of my talks on using a Google with my name. That's the easiest way.
Right.
Otherwise, I don't have anything that's really going right at the moment. So maybe eventually I'll get back into business. I don't know.
Yes, indeed. To make sure, you're one of the top people on the planet.
And it's very clear to me, by the way, Michelle, that The government currently still does not understand how to do a focused, disciplined approach to get, especially in the internet, or to deal with massive amounts of data, not just from the internet, but from companies dumping data on the government too, like banks giving all the transactions of their customers, or any other people like travel and so on. All of that. There's just so much data that they still don't understand how to deal with it. And that's not just true of the U.S. That's true of all the countries in the world that I know of.
And then it sort of inhibits or limits our ability to secure ourselves when they're overwhelmed.
That's absolutely right.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on this show today.
No, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Mr. Bill Binney, expert mathematician, the best hacker that the NSA has ever known, whistleblower, and American patriot. For the Industry Experts panel, I'm Michelle Holliday at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com.